on what, as far as I can see at the moment, is the first conference I've ever attended, possibly the first in history, which for most of the day has run ahead of schedule. But I think there's a reason for that. All of us speaking have been given 20 minutes each to talk about the idiocy and lunacy of Durban. And the truth is, you don't need 20 minutes. Any sane person could do it in 2. I don't need a podium to do it. I could do it lying down. So could any of you. That's why this is so ahead of schedule. But look, this is a little, it's a long way to come just to say that. So I should pad it out a bit, if you'll bear with me. But look, just to reprise, I mean, 10 years ago, in 2001, the first Durban conference, Fidel Castro was introduced as the leader of, quote, the most democratic country in the world. Now, in any normal circumstance, the UN should have said, Kofi Annan should have stepped forward after wiping the tears from his eyes and after everyone had got up off the floor and said, that's all, folks. That's enough comedy for 1 year. That should have been enough. But it wasn't. It wasn't. That wasn't the end of Durban. We've now had Durban 2, Durban 3, Durban 1. Following Fidel Castro, we had Yasser Arafat speaking. I picked up the New York Times this morning. Well, I didn't really pick it up. My hotel gave it to me. It's the only reason I've got it. But I was struck by the front-page story on the Declaration tomorrow. In the second column on the front page of the New York Times, after introducing Mr. Abbas, for decades, the defiant, charismatic, and unpredictable Yasser Arafat. I have to say, most contenders for the Republican nomination would kill to get coverage like that from the New York Times. But Mr. Arafat, the dead terrorist, still gets it all these years on. There was nothing defiant, charismatic, and unpredictable about him. He was a terrorist. That was it. He spent his life and career terrorizing. Anyhow, clearly the NYT's gone the way of the UN. Look, in my home country today, there's a huge row you may not have heard of today. It hasn't made all of the international papers. Lord West, who was formerly the first Sea Lord under the last Labour government, has got into one of those lovely political turmoils people get into, because he was on a panel in London this morning, and he said, this former Labour minister, he said, quote, we are a permanent member of the United Nations, we, Britain, Security Council, and I think that gives us certain clout and certain ability. These mean we're not a second-tier power. We're not bloody Denmark or Belgium. Now, if you're a politician, that's the sort of thing it's best not to say. It's true, even if you're a retired politician. And, of course, immediately demands for apology, huge concocted political rows, Conservatives demanding retraction, and the Labour Party has now formally apologised. But the truth is that Lord West, who I'm now going to be the first person to defend, may have said something impolitic, but it isn't wrong. It's not a lie. It's flattering, if anything. I'm not sure that Belgium makes second-tier status now, but the point is that the politic thing of pretending nations all the same all enjoy first-tier status is exactly the lie that the UN plays every single day. Every single day, the UN maintains this fiction. It maintains the fiction that all states and all governments are essentially equal. And when the Syrian government's foreign representative says something, it's as interesting and worthy of note as, say, when the British foreign secretary says something. But it isn't. The democracies of the world, the free countries of the world, and the dictatorships of this world are not moral equivalents, they're not moral equals. Governments who repress and murder their own people and seek to do it to others aren't equals to the democratic and free nations. But look, I mean, we've been through this all before. In 1975, as you all know, the UN passed the Zionism is Racism resolution, proposed by Idi Amin, the wife-eater, Literally, as you know. It wasn't a reading mistake on my part. A typo in my speech. And the next day, there was a reception thrown for him by Kurt Waldheim, the Nazi. Now, only at the UN could you have a group of people accusing Israel of being Nazi, and the accuser is a Nazi. It's a symptom of a sick institution. Fortunately, then, as now, there were people who were speaking out against it. America had an ambassador par excellence in the late, great Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who said that the resolution, among other things, granted, quote, symbolic amnesty and more to the murderers of the 6 million European Jews. For this and many other reasons which he gave, the lie had repercussions, he warned. These were prophetic words. He said, the terrible lie that's been told here today will have terrible consequences. People will begin to say, indeed they have already begun to say, that the UN is a place where lies are told. Moynihan explained that the motion which had been passed threatened not only the security and legitimacy of the State of Israel, but the security and standing of all nations of the UN. The motion harmed the fight against racism by stripping the term of any meaning and potentially damaging the security of all nations. For if racism could be so drained of meaning today, then so tomorrow could national self-determination, or indeed national honor. Finally, the resolution damaged the idea and the language of human rights. By assaulting a word, assaulting a language, assaulting the truth and telling lies, the UN has done something which the United States, as Moynihan said, does not acknowledge and will not abide by. The same day, Israel's ambassador, Chaim Herzog, declared, I stand here not as a supplicant for the issue is neither Israel nor Zionism. The issue is the continued existence of this organization, which has been dragged to its lowest point of discredit by a coalition of despots and racists. You yourselves bear the responsibility, for you stand before history. We, the Jewish people, will not forget. Now, that was 1975. I was born in 1979, as it happens. Between 1979 and 2001, indeed, between 1975 and 2001, a whole new generation of people were born, educated to some degree, and grew up. But throughout that whole time, the UN didn't grow up. The UN didn't change at all. And we saw the final apotheosis in that in the setting up of this farce of Durban. A farce, by the way, which also we have in the UN paid for. 25% of the cost of the first Durban conference was paid by the Americans. It's not surprising when you have largesse like that people will decide to take advantage of you. You know, the Organization of African Unity demanded at Durban 1 that reparations for the Hutu slaughter of the Tutsis in Rwanda should be paid, and it should be paid by the Americans, and not by the people who'd done any of the slaying. Of course not. Why would they have any responsibility for their actions? Why not go off to America to demand the money? Now, the UK and other countries sadly stayed on for another round of this farce, and in the UK's case, only recently withdrew from the latest one. But the idea among these nations was, the ones who wanted to stay in, was that it was better generally to be at the table. It was just much better to be in the negotiations, in the room, at the table, and to negotiate. Well, what is there to negotiate over? What is your negotiation with the numerous countries in the OIC whose representatives declared the Holocaust never happened? Do you want to barter them down? Do you want to barter them down from 6 million Jews to 3? It's grotesque, utterly grotesque, to even think of negotiating with parties like this. What about the threat to Israel, the elimination of the Zionist state? What is there to negotiate over in that? The elimination of some of the Jews? A moderate position? It's a farce. It's a farce to even turn up to something like this. It's a moral inversion and a historical inversion. Slavery comes up each time at this circus. And each time, the countries that were first to abolish slavery